Okay, welcome to Rick, Rabbi, and Rashi for Parshas Pekudei, the last parsha of the book of Exodus, also called Shabbat Chazak, because when we finish the Torah portion, we say Chazak, Chazak, and this Chazek, it ends off with may we be strengthened with this book of Torah, this knowledge, to use the power outward. So, Rick, let's get started. You are the more erudite scholar. You read the Chumash better than I do with the Rebbe's commentary. So you get to ask the questions. I'm going to ask you some questions.
Don't place me on a pedestal. I have a lot to learn, but it's wonderful to have this interaction between us. So my first question, and I realize we're going to have sort of an abbreviated session today, but my first question really goes to the heart of things, that why the continuous erection and deconstruction of the tabernacle until the first of Nisan, when the tabernacle is fully dedicated?
So it's a very good question. Just so people know the details, because not everybody reads the Chumash as well. That after we spoke the past few weeks of how the Jews, they donated materials, they had artisans, they built this magnificent portable tabernacle temple for the desert, but it wasn't yet, then, it had to actually house God. Like there had to be a revelation of some sort in it. And that was the dedication process. So what was the dedication process, right? So there were 7 days where Moshe, he himself put up this portable temple. He constructed it. Day one, deconstructed it. Again, constructed it and deconstructed it. 7 days, same thing. And then on the 8th, and he actually he did some of the priestly rites for those 7 days. And then the last day it was up. Aaron did the rites. Mm-hmm. And I don't think in this parsha, but elsewhere it says Aaron saw that the Shechina wasn't the karbonis, the priestly rites. The revelation wasn't coming. It was a problem. And he prayed, and it was a grand opening success. The Shechina, God's presence, really filled it. It was a revelation. The same way there was a revelation at Mount Sinai of God, this was a micro version of that. And it was in the temple. What exactly the revelation was, it's for a larger discussion. I can't tell you exactly. I don't remember. I wasn't there. I'm not a Kohen. But the basic idea of the revelation is that it was semi-miraculous. You saw God's presence, whatever that meant. But this is really the idea of the grand opening. So that your question is, why is it necessary to do a grand opening in such a detailed way? Construct, deconstruct. It seems
but not only that, Rabbi, but the fact that Moses was only one person and it took many people to construct it. Somehow there was like a miracle. He's able to lift the heavy beams, and that he does all of this in a way, and he does this 7 times.
Right. So why did God do it this way? Like a miraculous way. Moshe, a one-man show doing it. So I have to share with you something that I read a few years ago, and it's in the book called Talks on the Parsha by Rabbi Steinsaltz. It's not so old. It's relatively new, 5 years old or 6 years old. They came out with it. They collected over the years his talks on the Parsha. And as a great thinker and modern articulation, he really is amazing. So he says like this. Let's take an example when they put a man on the moon. How many years NASA work on creating a rocket ship to the moon? Mm-hmm. Right. And there was plans, and then there was, and thousands of engineers and scientists and they're working on prototypes. Right. And finally they have the rocket. Okay. How many times did they comb over every part of that ship? And he says it was, I forgot, I don't know the exact details, but it was a tremendous amount. You can imagine they would comb over every aspect of that rocket for probably years in advance. Because this is a big deal. I mean, it's a monumental thing to put a man on the moon and a man out of space, whatever. And, it's risky. It's, besides the lives at risk, this is a major endeavor of billions, maybe billions of dollars. They don't, we want it to be successful. So there was a tremendous amount, you can imagine, of engineers combing over the rocket ship before it went up. So taking that analogy, think about how incredible the feat of building a temple, where instead of us sending a rocket ship up to outer space, we are creating a ship, a temple that's going to be a portal to house godly revelation in a revealed way. That's a incredible feat. And that's what the Torah and the commentaries and the historical records say. It housed God. It wasn't just like we go to shul, and our shuls, our synagogues are called a mini temple, a mini Beit HaMikdash. But it's much more, as you know, it's much more emotional, internal type of feeling. Well, there it was palpable. That's an amazing feat. So Moshe is like that engineer who's combing over every day. Why was Moshe? I think there's a spiritual reason of Moshe, being a, I'll actually say in a second why it's Moshe, but Moshe is that head engineer or the main crew, putting it up, looking it over, putting it up, test drive, prototype, until finally it's ready to go on a mission where no man has gone before, no man has created down here. So I thought it was an incredible analogy.
It's a great metaphor for how it for that particular question. I think it's really apropos.
That's a very Steinsaltz way, using a very modern analogy for spiritual questions. Why was Moshe? You touched upon this. Why Moshe was the one to do it? So there's an interesting idea, which I'd like to ask you a question. Then we'll get back to Moshe.
Okay. But, we'll trade positions this time. I like that. Okay.
We're both. It's a circle. We're all,
Okay, that sounds good.
I was asked this question in my daily class. Why for 5 weeks are we spilling so much ink? The Torah is spending so much time about the mishkan, spending so much time the detail of the mishkan, repeating it. God says, do it. Moshe tells them to do it and repeats the ledger every time of all the items. And then they did it, repeats it again. Why so much time? So I said, my sort of cop-out answer is like, this is a prototype of the temple. The temple is the idea of we make a house for God. And that deserves a lot of ink. God is concerned with that. But the one question I remained with is, we don't spend as much time combing over the details of the Beit HaMikdash, the actual Jerusalem temple, in Kings 1, where it describes Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon doing it. We don't spend as much time. Why the mishkan? Why does it happen to be the mishkan gets this like incredible attention? The mishkan being the portable tabernacle.
Yeah. So obviously, I see it from the perspective of maybe like a diaspora Jew. Okay, remember we're coming out of slavery. We come to this point. We have the golden calf. We're uncertain about what it is, what we believe in. We sin by creating the golden calf. By the same token, we also know that the mishkan, if we build it, God's cloud will come and sit within there. And we know that we don't know what initially that we're gonna wander for 40 years, but God knows that we're gonna wander for 40 years. And every time we get ready to move again, God sort of removes himself, and then he reappears where we're moving to, and all of that happens. And I think it's the length of service and time that we put into this movement to get obviously to the promised land, as we talk about it that way, that we need to have this portable temple for ourselves. Much like in the diaspora, we need to have. We don't have a temple in the diaspora. The only temple is on the Temple Mount, when it will come after the Moshiach. But the point is, it's we don't have it in the diaspora. So what do? We have portable temples, sort of. We have a kihila here and a kihila there, those kinds of things. So everything is. So I believe that the Mishkan gets a lot of ink because I think they're preparing us for the time when we are not there where the temple is, when we don't have the ability, and where Rabbinic Judaism tends to take over.
We needed to come a portable Judaism that can go over the world. Very nice.
Right. Which, by the way, I think is one of our strengths. I think the Dalai Lama wants to know why the Jews survive so long. They survive because they have the portable Mishkan to take with them wherever they go.
Right. Very good. Touching on the question of connected to this, and what's special of the Mishkan, what you're saying,
Right.
and also connect the idea that why Moshe was the one who, was the one who put it up for 7 days. He was the one who had to do it himself. And why him? Why not other people? So there's something in which this shows you something special in Mishkan. I was reading an essay from the Rabbi, a sikha of the Rabbi called an essay, and it compares the Mishkan to the other two temples, and it says and actually 3 temples. Mashiach comes the 3rd temple. So you have Mishkan, you have the 2 temples in the Jerusalem that were, for about 1,000-year span, and then you have when Mashiach comes the 3rd temple, and it says the Mishkan has a certain advantage over the temple, like you're saying, a portable, but also the idea that the vessels, the furnishings, the let's say the altar of the Mishkan, right? What happened to them when they came to Jerusalem, to Israel? Like what happened? Like eventually they built a temple. So there's actually a period of time when they didn't have a temple. That wasn't until King Solomon. So that's I don't know the exact dates offhand, but they came into Israel, in Canaan, Israel, and they got most of the land, but there's still a lot of enemy tribes in the area, and they, for those years, the first, I think, like 500 years approximately, there was a town called Shiloh where the Mishkan was. Shiloh, then Nov and Givon, but mostly in Shiloh, and they used, I guess, the furnishings of the Mishkan, but they built like sort of like a more permanent version. They took parts of it and they, I don't say, put concrete. I mean, whatever. They made a more permanent structure. They did like maybe stone, but they used the drapes over it, and maybe they used the furnishings, the menorah and the altars and the table, the showbread table. But what's interesting is, once that was done, they built the temple. They entombed it somewhere. It's mystery where it is. It's entombed. So it's actually not only the furnishings of the Mishkan, but also the beams apparently were entombed somewhere. So there's somewhere in existence, like right now. There's somewhere but before they were still in control of the land. It wasn't like there was a destruction. Versus the other temples, what happened was, I think the menorah of the first temple and maybe some of the other furnishings, those were hidden away right before the Babylonian conquest, and everything else was destroyed, right? The walls were destroyed. And then the second temple, the Romans destroy it. So it comes out interesting, the Mishkan has this like eternal thing. It's still in existence somewhere. It was entombed somewhere. So it was never captured. It wasn't burned down. And there's a fascinating analysis here, is that's why is it? Why this essay was comparing, why is that, why did God make it like that? What's the secret sauce or the formula or the mechanics? And he says, because anything that God touches, God does, is eternal. What I'm saying, when we do something, it's eternal in a spiritual sense, but the physical aspect is not going to be forever, necessarily.
Right.
So the Mishkan that was done by Moshe, who's called a servant of God, and there's a Jewish law that a servant of Moshe's stature is literally an extension of the master. So it's like God, Moshe's almost doing it on behalf of God. Moshe's putting it up. The Mishkan is Moshe's, and Moshe is a servant of God, and a servant of God is an extension of God. Versus the other temples were made by man. Granted, God said to do it, and it was done, but it wasn't that level of servitude, of surrender, and as the Zohar, the Kabbalah calls Moshe, a chariot of God. So the Mishkan is like God's doing it. That's eternal, even physically. The other two temples are like man's doing it, which has, an expiration date, not spiritually, but physically. So I thought that was interesting about why Moshe had to do it. It's to make that sort of God touch to the Mishkan, and thereby giving it an eternal, lasting power.
Right. God through Moses creates the eternal use of the Mishkan.
And what's interesting is always the question is, That's very nice, but that's a nice historical, spiritual narrative. What can we learn from the fact that Moshe did it? What is that? Why? Other than like it's a nice historical record. So I'm just looking this up. This teaches us a very interesting idea. You might have noticed this in the notes. This is on page 592 on the bottom on the Kahal Chumash. So we know that we have to make our life a temple for God, right? Back then, they made their life a temple, but they had the physical, nuclear reactor to do it,
right?
In a positive sense.
Generating light and electricity.
Generating light, powering them up, and they go do their thing.
Yeah.
In diaspora, destruction of the temple, we got to do this all ourselves. Or not ourselves. We have Torah, we have mitzvahs, we have institutions, we have tremendous knowledge. It's not like we're alone on an island, but we have to take more responsibility because you got to make yourself a temple. This is not like a gym club ad, make your body a temple. This is more, I guess I feel your life a spiritual temple. So that's a very big idea. And we spoke about that the past few weeks. It's a recurring theme. Right. God said, they should make a temple and I'll dwell in them. Because the goal is not the temple. The goal is in them. And now we can still do it. We're still in them. We can still make a temple in us. We're the them. So, but there's one of the beautiful things, and we don't have time this week to go into it, here are all lessons of how to make every part of life God a temple in this way. There's just a quick example. There's a Holy of Holies. There's a Shabbos, right? That's Holy of Holies. That's a very unique experience, or Yom Kippur, whatever. Then there's work days. You also make those temples for God. You make your job and your career also a temple for God. But it's not the same as the Holy of Holies. It's the courtyard. So the metaphor of making temples is, when we want to construct ourselves a temple, there's an important general rule. Besides all the details of the symbolism, you need to go to a Moshe. What's a Moshe? In the Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Father, says a directive. Every person has to appoint a Rav, a mentor, a spiritual mentor. You have to say, you can't do it alone. You need to have a Moshe in your life. Who's your Moshe? And by the way, it doesn't have to be a guy like Moshe. It could be a more, regular guy like all of us. But if somebody you feel you can relate to who has a tad more spiritual clarity, even though they're still on their journey, you can appoint that person as your Moshe. And that is the way you really know if you're being honest and you're making your whole life and every part of it a dwelling of God, because we're all biased. We're all going to do things. A temple, we might be a temple for ourselves. Maybe it's a temple for our own idolatry, our ego. How do you know it's a temple for God? You got to give it over initially to Moshe. Doesn't mean be a blind follower, but it's someone you discuss, a spiritual mentor you can discuss your life decisions with. And the Rabbi, just to give you a modern application, little Chabad narrative. Chabad Hasidim were very dependent. Vogel, it was a part of life. The Rebbe gave was very accessible to the entire world and the Jewish world. People were like, but the Rebbe in the 80s saw a shift, and he begged people. He said, it's a bakosha nafshis. He said, Chabad does tefillin on people, right? One of the 10 mitzvahs that the Rebbe, mitzvah campaigns the Rebbe promoted. He made more than 10. One of them was this directive: make yourself a mentor. Appoint somebody a little more Jewishly, spiritually, morally knowledgeable, or you think they are, or you look up to them. Appoint them and discuss with them. And many times after that, as in the 80s, people would write to the Rebbe asking questions. He would say, new phase in Chabad, I'm delegating. Who's your Moshe? Who's your Rav? Who's your Moshe? Yeah. It doesn't mean the Rebbe didn't help, but he really felt that this is a it's not his thing. It's from Pirkei Avot. It's Talmudic era. It's basic Judaism, but the Rebbe really pushed for it heavily.
So it's almost like, and I know we need to end quickly, but there's almost like what we discussed in this parsha about all the individuals creating all of the garments and all of the whatever for the tabernacles, as each tribe had its own specific tasks as an individuals. And then there was always the collective. And I think the Rebbe saw the collective piece, but realized that he would not be here forever. So he needed to sort of move it down to the tribes, right? To the people that they could talk to.
I think the Rebbe, to say in one word, the Rebbe is hard. But I'd say along these lines, the Rebbe saw life as being on multiple planes of reality. And that is well expressed what you're talking about, that we are we're a part of a collective. We're nothing. We're just part of a collective. We're not an individual,
right.
But then we're an individual.
Right.
And he saw that every person has to use their individual powers to help the collective. But then the collective has to not get caught up in groupthink or whatever, and just herd type of goals, has to always revise its mission statement for the individuals. I mean, obviously there's a certain level of majority rules, but that's sort of maybe just, utilitarian. But in theory, you're always striving. I want to be part of a collective and I want to be part of an individual, but I'm an individual. So I can't cop out, say, I'm part of the collective. I'm just part of the party, On the other hand, you can't say I'm so hyper individualistic. I don't care about the collective. Everything was about a spiritual tension, a good way that once, and then you'll find perfection in both.
Right. It strengthens the collective strengthens the individual, and the individual strengthens the collective. Exactly. In shorthand. And I totally believe that.
And that's Pekudei. Pekudei is counting, individual, and this is more of the week. So this last week was Vayakil, collective.
Right.
Now we're talking a little bit more about the focus on individual, but we gotta have both. So
and next week we start a new chapter.
Chazak. Thank you for. I think we did most of the book of Shemos together with this podcast.
We did.
And Chazak, next week we'll start book number 3, Vayikra.
All right. Shabbat shalom, everybody. And thank you so much, Rabbi. Good to see you.
Thank you.